1986 gave us Top Gun, Ferris Bueller, and the golden age of blockbuster cinema. But buried beneath those triumphs were some catastrophic financial disasters. We're not talking about the famous flops you've already heard about. We're talking about the films that studios desperately tried to erase from history. One production burned through $40 million and earned less than $2 million back. Another was completed just hours before a national tragedy made it unwatchable. A legendary comedy icon's final film was shot while she unknowingly battled an illness that would claim her life 3 years later, and one movie flopped so hard in America that it somehow became the #1 film in the Soviet Union. You won't believe number 7. Sky Bandits wasn't just forgotten. It was obliterated from cinematic memory. This 1986 British production cost $18 million and earned barely $2 million, making it one of the most expensive independent films ever made and also one of the biggest disasters. The premise sounds like a fever dream. 2 Wild West bank robbers get conscripted into World War I, join the Royal Flying Corps, and must destroy a German zeppelin. Director Zoran Perisic was the Oscar-winning visual effects artist who invented the technique that made Christopher Reeve fly in Superman. This was his first time directing. The production employed a record-breaking 582-person crew. Galaxy International released the film across 1,335 theaters, hoping saturation would compensate for the complete lack of star power. Roger Ebert gave it 1 star, writing that the design of the airplanes was its single, lonely, redeeming facet. Today, Sky Bandits exists as a curiosity on streaming platforms, watched by essentially no one. It remains one of the most thoroughly forgotten expensive productions of the decade. But if you think $18 million down the drain is bad, the next entry lost even more while featuring one of the greatest casts ever assembled. Power featured Richard Gere, Gene Hackman, Julie Christie, and a pre-stardom Denzel Washington, all directed by the legendary Sidney Lumet, and somehow nobody saw it. The 1986 political thriller cost between $14 and $16 million and grossed barely $4 million. Gere plays a ruthless political media consultant who suspects his newest client has dark secrets. The film was eerily prescient about image over substance campaigns and media manipulation. Burt Reynolds was originally cast but withdrew due to complications from a jaw fracture sustained during city heat. At its Sundance premiere, projectionists showed the reels out of order. 84 minutes in, the screening had to be stopped entirely. Reportedly, the only time in the festival's history this has happened. The film opened to just $1.85 million across 770 theaters and vanished. Denzel Washington won the 1987 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Supporting Actor despite the film's invisibility. Today, Power is a genuine deep cut that somehow united Lumet, Gere, Hackman, Christie, and Washington and produced nothing anyone remembers. But at least Power only lost around $12 million. The next entry spent 20 years getting made and still managed to lose $21 million. Tai Pan holds one of Hollywood's most tortured development histories. The rights to James Clavell's best-selling novel about the founding of Hong Kong were first purchased in 1966. Yes, really. Over 2 decades, the project cycled through Patrick McGoohan, Steve McQueen, Roger Moore, and Sean Connery. None ended up on screen. McQueen pocketed a $1 million advance before dropping out when producers couldn't pay his second installment. Moore grew a beard for the role before financing collapsed. When Dino De Laurentiis finally got it made as the first English-language film shot in mainland China, the production was plagued by government interference and a $630,000 levy imposed by Chinese officials. The film cost $25 million and grossed barely $4 million. De Laurentiis later declared it was an error making the movie in China. The Los Angeles Times called it a textbook example of how not to adapt a historical adventure romance. James Clavell said he hadn't seen the film because it just hadn't been convenient. Joan Chen was nominated for Razzie Worst New Star, but recovered spectacularly by starring in The Last Emperor the very next year. Tai Pan's failure directly contributed to De Laurentiis Entertainment Group's 1988 bankruptcy. But at least Tai Pan had an excuse for its production troubles. The next entry had no excuse at all. Blue City is a textbook case of cynical franchise chasing gone wrong. Director Michelle Manning had been the co-producer of The Breakfast Club, and she specifically reunited Judd Nelson and Ali Sheedy for this noir thriller about a young man investigating his father's passing in a corrupt Florida town. The film cost $10 million and grossed under $7 million. Manning got the directing job because her Breakfast Club co-producer, Ned Tanen, had become head of Paramount Production. Walter Hill originally wrote the screenplay for a leading man in his mid-30s, but it was rewritten for a young Brat Pack actor. The San Francisco Chronicle delivered perhaps the most devastating burn of any 1986 review, writing that Judd Nelson would make a great shopping cart and Sheedy a still life of a cornflower gone to wilt. The film earned 5 Razzie nominations, including Worst Picture, Director, and Actor. Here's the twist. Despite directing one of the worst reviewed films of 1986, Michelle Manning eventually became president of production at Paramount Pictures in 1997, overseeing Forrest Gump, Titanic, and Saving Private Ryan. She later reflected that she wasn't a war criminal. The next entry also had terrible timing, but for an entirely different reason. American Anthem tried to turn 1984 Olympic gold medalist Mitch Gaylord into a movie star using the exact same formula that turned Prince into a phenomenon with Purple Rain. Director Albert Magnoli recycled his own template. Superstar, in another field, plus troubled home life, plus romantic interest, plus climactic performance equals hit movie. There was just one problem. Prince possessed incandescent charisma. Gaylord did not. The gymnastics drama cost $7 million and grossed under $5 million. Roger Ebert surgically dismantled the formula, presenting American Anthem as a very bad identikit sketch of Purple Rain. Gene Siskel declared it complete junk. Gaylord earned a Razzie nomination for Worst New Star. The film holds a perfect 0% on Rotten Tomatoes across 16 reviews, making it one of the worst reviewed sports films ever made. Magnoli never directed another theatrical hit. Gaylord's acting career fizzled into direct-to-video work. He later became a stunt double for Chris O'Donnell's Robin in Batman Forever and now works as a financial advisor. Janet Jones went on to marry Wayne Gretzky, but if American Anthem's failure seems modest, the next entry nearly bankrupted one of comedy's greatest legends. Solarbabies almost destroyed Mel Brooks. In a post-apocalyptic future where water is controlled by a totalitarian government, orphan teenagers who play a roller skating sport called skateball discover a magical glowing orb and escape across the desert on roller skates. That is the real plot, and it cost $25 million. The project began as a scrappy $5 million concept. Brooks was convinced it had Star Wars-like potential, and the budget quintupled. Heavy rains in Spain destroyed early footage, bitterly ironic for a film about water scarcity. Director Alan Johnson and the young cast fought so bitterly that Brooks had to fly to the set and threaten to fire everyone. Brooks was left $9 million in personal debt. He described the financial devastation with painful candor, saying people were coming to his house and his wife, Anne Bancroft, was asking who these people in the kitchen were. He told her he was just getting more insurance, but really, he was getting a second mortgage on the house. Today, Solarbabies has achieved modest cult status as a so bad, it's good curiosity. Jason Patric and Jamie Gertz went directly into the Lost Boys the following year. Gertz is now a billionaire. Brooks insists Solarbabies is not a failure. But if Solarbabies seems like a bizarre passion project, the next entry makes it look sensible by comparison. Pirates was Roman Polanski's 12-year obsession, and it became one of the biggest financial disasters of the decade. The director first envisioned the project in 1974 with Jack Nicholson as Captain Red. When Polanski pleaded with Nicholson about salary demands, Nicholson reportedly replied with 2 words, "I want more." The project stalled repeatedly through legal troubles and financing failures. By the time cameras rolled in Tunisia, $7 to $8 million of the $40 million budget had been spent on a single prop, the Neptune, a fully seaworthy 63-meter Spanish galleon built by over 2,000 craftsmen. Walter Matthau, then 66, took the lead role. He later admitted he didn't like or understand the script. He said first it was the ship against the pirates, then the pirates against the ship. He didn't think it was funny or adventurous. Critics agreed. One wrote it was the sorriest movie ever to fly the Jolly Roger. The film grossed $1.6 million domestically against its $40 million budget. Make no mistake, this represents the biggest single financial loss on this list. After the catastrophic failure, the Neptune ship sat abandoned in Cannes Harbor for 16 years. In 2002, it was moved to Genoa, Italy, where it operates today as a floating museum. The ship is arguably more famous than the film. But at least pirates found an afterlife for its props. The next entry found its afterlife in the strangest place imaginable. King Kong Lives was a catastrophe in America, and somehow the #1 film in the Soviet Union. The sequel reveals that Kong survived his fall from the World Trade Center and has been kept in a coma for 10 years. He gets an artificial heart transplant, meets a female ape dubbed Lady Kong, and is hunted by the military. The studio knew it had a disaster. When sending screening copies to Siskel and Ebert, they sent letters stipulating critics could show clips on local Chicago shows only if they signed promises not to air them nationally. Both refused. Siskel told viewers to think about it. They couldn't find a single scene they wanted you to see. Here's the twist. When the film was released in the Soviet Union in 1988, it sold 53.6 million tickets, becoming the top-grossing foreign film of the year. At estimated Soviet ticket prices, this represents roughly $44 million in equivalent revenue. The film that was a punchline in America became a genuine blockbuster behind the Iron Curtain. Linda Hamilton said she was absolutely horrified when she saw the final product. But horrified takes on a whole new meaning with the next entry. Club Paradise somehow assembled Robin Williams, Peter O'Toole, Rick Moranis, Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, and reggae legend Jimmy Cliff into one movie. And nobody cared. Williams plays a retired Chicago firefighter who opens a Club Med-style resort on a fictional Caribbean island. The film cost between $15 and $19 million and grossed barely $12 million. The casting history tells the real story. Director Harold Ramis explained it was intended for Bill Murray and John Cleese, with Murray as the laid-back guy and Cleese as the over-the-top guy. They ended up with Williams and O'Toole, with the polarities shifted. Murray turned down the lead. Cleese dropped out immediately. Co-writer Harry Shearer was so appalled that he demanded his name be removed from the credits, replaced with the pseudonym Ed Roboto. Only 2 words of his rewrite made it into the film. The title, Club Paradise. Peter O'Toole earned a Razzie nomination for Worst Supporting Actor. The failure was devastating for Ramis's directing career. He didn't direct another film for 7 years. But when he did, it was Groundhog Day, one of the greatest comedies ever made. But if Club Paradise had behind-the-scenes chaos, the next entry had chaos that made international headlines. Shanghai Surprise paired the world's biggest pop star with one of Hollywood's angriest actors, and the result was absolute mayhem. Sean Penn and Madonna, then newlyweds, starred in this 1937 Shanghai set adventure about a con man helping a missionary nurse recover stolen medical supplies. The film cost $17 million and grossed barely $2 million. The production devolved into chaos immediately. Penn punched a photographer on set in Hong Kong and demanded the publicist be fired. He used Madonna's contractual casting approval as leverage. Since she wouldn't approve any replacement for her husband, Penn could essentially hold the production hostage. George Harrison produced the film and was forced to fly to Hong Kong for a damage control press conference that British tabloids dubbed Flop Suey. Harrison's later assessments were blunt. He said, "If you want the truth, it was a pain in the neck. Because they were doing a comedy, and she hasn't got a sense of humor." Madonna won the Razzie for Worst Actress, the first of many. She later won Worst Actress of the Decade. Director Jim Goddard never directed another theatrical film of note. But if Shanghai Surprise was a celebrity vanity project gone wrong, the next entry was a family film released at the worst possible moment in American history. SpaceCamp was completed before January 1986 and scheduled for summer release. Then, on January 28, 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after launch. Director Harry Weiner was scheduled to view the final cut that very morning. He said the first time they looked at the final cut was an hour after it happened. They were devastated. The film follows 5 SpaceCamp attendees accidentally launched into orbit when a robot takes a child's wish too literally. The parallels to the real disaster were agonizing. Like the tragedy, the film's malfunction involved a solid rocket booster. The film opened on June 6, 1986. The same day President Reagan received the Rogers Commission report. Roger Ebert wrote that SpaceCamp was doomed before it began. The cast is remarkable in retrospect. Joaquin Phoenix, credited as Leaf Phoenix, made his feature film debut at age 11. 33 years later, he won the Academy Award for Joker. The score was composed by John Williams. The film cost $18 million and grossed under $10 million. Leah Thompson later reflected with genuine emotion, saying nobody wanted to see a film about kids accidentally blasting off in the space shuttle. But since then, people have told her they became physicists because of that movie. The real SpaceCamp saw attendance double after release. In 2016, the cast was inducted into the SpaceCamp Hall of Fame. Sometimes tragedy creates unexpected legacies, but the next entry carries a legacy that's both triumphant and heartbreaking. At first glance, Haunted Honeymoon looks like a lighthearted tribute to 1930s horror comedy. Gene Wilder wrote, directed, and starred alongside his real-life wife Gilda Radner in this tale of a radio performer whose family tries to cure his panic attacks by scaring him in a gothic mansion. Dom DeLuise played Great Aunt Kate in full drag. The film cost between $9 and $13 million and grossed $8 million. But numbers don't tell this story. During filming at London's Elstree Studios in 1985, Radner began experiencing severe fatigue and leg pain. She discovered she was pregnant during production, but suffered a devastating loss. Doctors misdiagnosed her symptoms for 10 months. In October 1986, just months after release, Radner was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. She passed away on May 20th, 1989, at age 42. Haunted Honeymoon was her final feature film. Radner herself described it in her autobiography as a flop, only in theaters for a week. DeLuise won the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Supporting Actress. But none of that matters compared to what the film represents. Wilder later channeled his grief into advocacy, establishing the Gilda Radner Hereditary Cancer Program at Cedars-Sinai. He wrote that Gilda didn't have to pass away, but he was ignorant, Gilda was ignorant, and the doctors were ignorant. The film never achieved the cult status of Young Frankenstein, but for those who know its backstory, Haunted Honeymoon resonates with a sadness that transcends its modest ambitions. It's the last time we see one of comedy's brightest lights performing alongside the love of her life. Sometimes the biggest losses can't be measured in dollars. 12 films, hundreds of millions of dollars. Careers launched, careers destroyed, and legacies forever altered. Some of these productions were undone by hubris, some by tragedy, others by timing so catastrophic it seems almost cosmic. What they all share is the strange truth that failure often teaches more than success ever could. Harold Ramis went from Club Paradise to Groundhog Day. Michelle Manning went from the 0% rated Blue City to presiding over Titanic at Paramount. Joaquin Phoenix went from an uncredited child actor in a flop to Oscar winner. Joan Chen recovered from Razzie nominations to star in The Last Emperor. A $40 million ship became a beloved tourist attraction. And somewhere in the Soviet Union, 53 million people loved King Kong lives. Were these films disasters? Or were they just ahead of their time in all the wrong ways? How many of these have you actually seen? Which one shocked you the most? If you made it this far, you've earned the right to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into Hollywood's buried history, because sometimes the best stories are the ones the studios tried hardest to forget. See you in the next one. Hi, it's